So we got a nice, cozy fireside chat going. It's like small crowd, so we'll do what we can. So I'm Matthew Martin. I'm the CEO and founder of Two Candlesticks. We're a cybersecurity consulting firm based in the U.S. And so I wanted to just talk a little bit about how we've been using Gen AI and some potential use cases where we've seen things work and things not work. This slide, usually I talk a lot more about it, but I think since you guys are here, I don't need to go too much into why AI is the future and going to create a bunch of productivity stuff. So I'll move through it relatively quickly. But one of the things I wanted to start with is before we're going to do anything in cybersecurity with generative AI, we do a generative AI assessment. And so these are the points of places where we're going to dive into just to make sure that the customer is ready, or the client is ready to do this. So we want to make sure they understand that most people are still trying to figure out what to do with generative AI. They want to use it. Most executives I talk to are adamant that they want to use it. They just have no earthly idea how to and what use case to go about it. So a lot of this is trying to help them understand sort of what's possible and where to start. We want to go through the potential risks so they understand it from a cyber side. So this might be a little different than what you've heard so far at the conference, but making sure that we understand authentication and authorization. Are people getting access to it at the right time and the right people? We want to understand malicious insiders and how they can take advantage of the system. Rogue implementations. I'm sure you've all seen those. As a friend of mine likes to say, shadow AI is all over the place. So we want to make sure you have a handle on it. And then making sure we understand that we want it to be explainable, transparent, and there's not any discrimination in there. There's a ton of benefits, and that's the stuff we need to focus on. It's going to increase our accuracy, especially in cybersecurity. We get overloaded with alerts and trying to understand what's a false positive, what's real, and being able to understand it. Generative AI can help us get to that really quickly. It's also going to transform our interactional efficiency. And because usually when you have a cybersecurity analyst that's dealing with some incident, you're going to spend somewhere between 15 to 45 minutes just getting context around what happened, right? So when you're talking to an end user, they have no idea what data to give you, right? Just trying to understand what happened, ask them questions. They're going to be afraid to tell you what happened, right? So trying to get them a level of comfort to actually be honest. I clicked on this, I put in my credentials, whatever. And what I've seen so far is in a chatbot form, people tend to open up a little bit more because they're not getting judged by another human. And so they'll give us a little bit more information around security incidents. So this is a huge benefit we see in this. And then I also want to mention a little bit about the unknowns, right? Because there are things that we don't know yet. We don't know exactly how we're going to protect the critical data that's getting used by these chatbots. We still need to figure that out. We don't know how much it's going to, how much ROI we're going to get yet, because we don't know exactly how it's going to be used. So there's things that we've got to figure out. And then, of course, the regulatory and legal requirements are changing every day. And depending on where you are, the EU, UK, US, it's all different, right? And so trying to understand that is important. So one of the things that we worry about in cybersecurity is hallucinations, and I'm sure everybody's heard about that to death the last few days, but I won't go into detail on the examples, but you see people getting sued in the US for defamation because of a hallucination. OpenAI's got lawsuits. There's corporate secrets all over the place because people are using it to get coding help, to get PowerPoint help, whatever. So this stuff's leaking out everywhere, right? When Bard came out, there was a factual error immediately that cost them $100 million in market cap overnight, right? So hallucinations have a huge impact to what's going on. But I think it's important to understand that there's really three types of hallucinations. And this is where it can get really interesting. So there's benign hallucinations where it's inaccurate, nonsensical, doesn't really matter, doesn't have any impact on anything. You're asked it to write a thank you note and it gives you some weird thing, no big deal. Then we have the harmful hallucinations, which everybody talks about, right? It's where it just makes up something. Like if you're trying to do like a portfolio of investments and you want to rebalance it, it messes that up. It's going to be hugely impactful. You're going to lose trust, whatever. So those are the harmful ones. But there's also some beneficial ones, and it's another one that we can use within cybersecurity. And what you're basically trying to do is trick it into giving you something that you wouldn't normally think about, right? So tell it to pretend like it's in a different universe or it's whatever, right? You just come up with different things, and I'll be glad to share some examples that we use separately, but you're just trying to get it to make up something, and then it can give you some really interesting process improvement ideas because it just thinks differently than we do. And so I think it's important for us to understand there's a use case there for general business processes. There's a huge one there for cybersecurity, because when we're thinking about how can a vulnerability be exploited, we tend to be influenced by the way we've seen it historically be exploited. But generative AI might think of a different way to exploit that vulnerability and help us build our controls in a better way, right? So important to keep those in mind. So I wanted to show an example. This is a chatbot that we put in early last year with a financial services client. It's using Slack. But what we try to do is just, it's very similar actually if you saw the talk yesterday with the Dutch police, where it's a way for citizens to report. So this is similar just in a corporate environment, where if somebody accidentally clicks on something or somebody sees something going on, whatever, they can go to Slack and they can say, hey, this happened. And then it's going to ask it a bunch of contextual questions to try to figure out, is it a real incident? Is it not? Whatever. Once it figures out that it is a real incident, then it automatically will go into ServiceNow, create a ticket, give that ticket number back to the end user, and then it would go straight into our incident responders, would be able to then take that information and start working on the incident immediately, saving them, like I said earlier, somewhere between 15 to 45 minutes every incident. And so now they're working on more accurate things. They're not getting bogged down by false positives, and they have all the context. The other nice thing for the end user is at any point, they can go ask the Slack bot, hey, what's the status? And it'll tell them, like, this is still open, this is with whatever. They can see all the information they need to see. They'll get a message back when it closes out. So it saves you all that sort of communication time. And so from a SOC, a Security Operations Center, this is saving hours every week for every analyst. So it can get some huge benefits there within the Security Operations Center at a time when there's not a ton of money to hire new people, and there's a talent shortage everywhere, right? And so people are very, very expensive. And so if we can take the people we have, we can allow them to work on more elevated things, more important things, and we can outsource some of this like level 1 stuff to Gen AI. Then it allows us to function better as a world, right, in security. So a couple other things I think could be really interesting for future use cases. One is around vulnerability management. It's what I was talking about earlier. We're trying to think of different ways to exploit vulnerabilities or different ways to mitigate risks in that world. Like, do we have compensating controls or not? What does that chain of attack look like for these exploits? And then what controls can we put in place? And allowing Gen AI to look at it to give us some different kind of thought, right? So maybe some tools we have in place now that we can use in a different way to come up with something different. Access management, I think, is a gold mine of opportunity. I just haven't had a chance to really dive into it yet. But one of the things that I see in most corporations is that managers spend an inordinate amount of time dealing with tickets. You got onboard somebody, offboard somebody, transfer somebody, access or recertification, attend, all this stuff that's going on. You get bogged down in just admin time. And so if you just had a chatbot that you could literally just converse with, of like, hey, this person's moving, this person's doing this, whatever, and it just automatically does those tickets, huge time savings. And I think that's a place for security teams where it would be a huge impact, because now we can reduce the offshore presence. We wouldn't have to have as many IAM people, and there's a big thing there. The last one I'll mention is training and awareness. This is a situation where I think it's just there's two things. One, we're seeing phishing attempts that are way more complex today because of generative AI than we've ever seen before. One of the things you used to always tell people is look for grammar mistakes and look for sense of urgency in the type and things. Very common things we would see. We don't see those much anymore because people are using things like ChatGPT and others to craft these things for them. They look really good and it's really hard to spot. And so I think it's hugely beneficial for us on the defense side to start using that to start trying to identify things. And there's a couple companies out there now. Abnormal Security and Iron Scales are both doing it within email. If any of you guys work in cybersecurity groups, those are two that are using it really, really well. But also using it to develop training materials and be able to tie back to what you're seeing existing coming into your SOC. So if you're seeing phishing attempts that are very specific, you can then use generative AI to craft simulations that are mirroring what you're actually seeing in your environment instead of just coming up with the normal UPS or tax return simulations that everybody uses. Now you can use them a little more targeted to what you're really seeing. So a couple things I just wanted to mention about potential roadblocks and rolling this out that I've seen with cybersecurity teams. Usually there's no central ownership. Everybody's doing it on their own, which leads back to the shadow AI problem, right? So if you are trying to do this as a security team, make sure you know who actually owns this process, like AI and generative AI specifically, at your firm. Most of the time they end up just giving it to whoever's starting it first, and that's mostly the problem. But that's going to get you tied into the office politics, which we're trying to avoid, right? The other thing I'll mention really is you've got to have a vision or a purpose for why you're using it, right? So if you're in a security team and you're trying to set this up, like don't just go into it saying I'm going to use it somehow, but like what are you actually trying to do? And so you have a mission that you're after. You can actually put the right resources and solve the problem as opposed to just sort of ad hoc working through it. And because that's going to allow you to prioritize what you're trying to do, spend money the right way, and then be able to repurpose resources as you're able to implement things. And then lastly, I'm sure you're all aware, it's the low quality data sources. Data is what matters. If you don't have good data, this isn't going to really help you that much. So make sure that you're understanding where your data is going to come from and that you trust those data sources and that they're consistent. So a little bit to wrap up how to protect it. I've had a lot of people ask me, if you're implementing generative AI, what do you do to secure generative AI? Basically the same stuff you do today for everything else, right? But it's really understanding what data are you using, how does the model access that data, and then how are you protecting who's accessing the model, how are you protecting for like prompt injections, things like that. But the basic stuff is still important, right? Understand all your third-party components, understand the regulatory requirements, understand your access control. Really important to understand who needs access and what do they need access to, right? Not everybody needs access to everything, right? So make sure you have it layered down. Your secure development lifecycle is going to be just as important here as anywhere else. Make sure you're patching, your data is validated. User training, make sure people know what they're doing with it. Make sure people understand how it works so they can spot hallucinations. They don't just blindly trust whatever it pops out, right? But make sure they understand to spot check and they understand when's a good time to use it, when's maybe not a good time to use it. It's important to have an AI policy, that the whole firm sticks to, right? So I think it's important to push that. And then finally, make sure you've got good threat monitoring, you're continuously testing it, and you have audit and logging, because you will get audited, and the regulators are going to want to see how you're using it. Can you explain what it's doing? That sort of thing. So it's basically the same thing we've been doing for decades. It's just making sure that we understand how the generative AI that you're using actually works so you can demonstrate how your controls are in place. With that, I will end. Any questions?
Hi. Yep. Thanks for that. I'm just curious, there was the case in Hong Kong a few weeks ago where the worker got conned by a deep fake video and he transferred 25 million thinking he was talking to his real CFO. So when I'm kind of doing this training, I kind of talk about deepfakes will be the new kind of phishing. Do you think that's the case? And I mean, where anybody's CEO could be mimicked and we could be asked.
Yeah, 100% is a possibility. I don't think that it's something that everybody has to worry about. Like, it's not going to hit the smaller companies, but the bigger ones, absolutely. And I think it's a very similar training to what we do. Like, if you think like financial services, like somebody wants to trade or sell off their portfolio, there's always callback measures in place, right? No matter if you're talking to them on the phone or whatever, you say, okay, I'm going to hang up and I'll call you back.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the way you combat deepfakes, right? If somebody's on a Zoom call with you and it's clearly them, and you can't tell a difference, but hey, I'm just going to call you right back on the number you know.
Yeah.
On the cell phone number, office number, whatever, then you can validate it. But there's no way an end user is going to be able to spot that and go, oh yeah, that's not real. So you're going to have those processes. But like I said, it's the same processes we've had to stop fraud forever. We just need to make sure we train people on that.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
I'm curious what kind of data you may have that could be useful for AI data sets.
Sorry, I could.
What data you may have that could be useful for an AI data set?
Me personally, I don't collect the data. Yeah, but the companies, depending on how it depends on how you're going to use the data set. But there's tons of data in there about user behaviors, about the way the data moves, and the way end users communicate with each other, and the way data flows. You could learn a ton from it, but it depends on how you want to use the data set, to be honest. Yeah. Yeah.
As a norm, machine learning methods were used for anomaly detection. So I'm guessing anomaly detection is going to be explored in the generative AI space. How successful has it been so far? Because I've read a lot of papers on the anomaly detection in the ML lab space, but little evidence at the moment. What have you seen so far in the cases, or as part of your company, or the extended ecosystem that you work with?
Yeah, so using generative AI for anomaly detection, right? It's something that everybody's trying to do, but the hallucinations are causing. Until somebody can completely solve that problem, I just don't think it's going to be a big deal. I think that's the general problem with using generative AI for a lot of that stuff, is especially in the security space. If you can't 100% trust that detection, it's useless. So I think it will come. It's just not ready yet.
Yeah, I suspected that. Thank you.
Follow up on that. So you mentioned, if there's any hallucinations, and we just talked about, there's probably going to be some level of risk associated. What's your perspective on that? Is it one of those situations where, nope, 0%, if that's the case, we can't do it?
I think it depends on what you're using it for. If I'm using it to write marketing materials or thank you letters, then I'm fine. If I'm using it to rebalance a stock portfolio, 0. Right? And it's just like we do with any other. If you talk to a data scientist, it's similar, right? But our accuracy rate on generative AI is nowhere near what it is in other disciplines, and so there's a long way to go before we get to the point where we're trusting that in production.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Thank you so much for that presentation. Let's give one more round of applause.